with that being said, let's talk about how your information is not very secure, unless maybe it has good technology behind it. Because, well, we hear about a lot of stuff on the fringes. We hear about a lot of, like parenthetic evidence of things happening. And a lot of people look at these bits of information here and there, and they start wondering, well, is there something bigger going on? It certainly seems like it. Well, let's talk about how there's something bigger going on and how the World Health Organization actually announced it, because it's pretty crazy. Let me explain. I'm going to start with what's happening with Twitter, and then we're going to go down the rabbit hole together, folks. So it says here, now, Twitter, as we've mentioned, is continuing its campaign to silence people who criticize Big Pharma around the virus. Just recently, Twitter suspended media company Grabian News for posting a video of Representative Andy Biggs, Republican from Arizona, for talking about alternative COVID-19 treatments, including the use of ivermectin. Grabian founder Tom Elliott wrote on Twitter that the company's move to suspend the account is next level Twitter absurdity. And he said also, quote, obviously in this case, quoting an elected leader on an issue that matters to everyone is important and newsworthy, regardless of whether you agree. Remember, they deleted a news organization's Twitter page, or suspended it. They suspended a news organization's Twitter page for posting a video of a public official giving a statement, right? And he said as well, and I can't help but add that his basic point was once mainstream among progressives. In other words, a lot of what he's talking about was not considered controversial. It is only controversial because the narrative is switched, and some individuals may have decided somewhere that type of information, alternative remedies or whatever, alternative treatments, should not for some reason be discussed. Now, Twitter did not respond for a request for comment by the Epoch Times, but this follows a recent string of similar censorship by the social network. This includes its suspension of Dr. Robert Malone, as we just mentioned, and a suspension of Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene's, she's a Republican from Georgia, her personal Twitter page. Now, with this recent push for censorship, it's important to remember, folks, that this type was a key piece in the World Health Organization's campaign to deal with COVID-19 from the very beginning, from very early on. Now, let me show you a page right here. Have a look at this. This is the official World Health Organization page on how to report misinformation online. And that's the exact name of it, How to Report Misinformation Online from the World Health Organization. And I'll read you just a bit of it. I won't go over the whole thing because it's quite long. It says, as the world responds to the COVID-19 pandemic, we face the challenge of an overabundance of information related to the virus. So there's just too much information, folks. There shouldn't be so many options of information, apparently. This should be narrowed. They say, again, we face the challenge of an overabundance of information related to the virus. And that lays out some of the agenda right there. If there's an overabundance, then what is the solution? You remove the abundance. You make it so some people can talk and some people can't, right? Now it continues stating, some of this information may be false and potentially harmful. Inaccurate information spreads widely and at speed, making it more difficult for the public to identify verified facts, and advice from trusted sources, such as their local health authority or WHO. Definitely a trusted source, I'm sure. However, everyone can help to stop the spread. If you see content online that you believe to be false or misleading, you can report it to the hosting social media platform. Now, I won't go over all this, but if you scroll down, it includes guides, social media by social media, on how to file these reports to report on content. Now, a bit more on this. Remember as well, the World Health Organization had a campaign, as you see here, for, quote, immunizing the public against misinformation. Why is the World Health Organization getting involved in information operations? Why were they doing this? And frankly, why are more people not talking about this? Now, It coined the word in this elsewhere, but in this document as well, they coined the word, quote, infodemic. That there was an information pandemic, as they described it. And still states on its website, as you can see here, an overabundance of information and the rapid spread of misleading or fabricated news, images, and videos. Like the virus, it is highly contagious and grows exponentially. It also complements COVID-19 pandemic response efforts. Now, its Director General, Tedros, a former Ethiopian communist, look into him, said this, quote, "We're not just battling the virus." This is Tedros, an exact quote from Tedros. "We're not just battling the virus. We're also battling the trolls and conspiracy theorists that push misinformation and undermine the outbreak response." Now, folks, on this, the biggest part of the announcement, in my opinion, wasn't this whole infodemic part, right? A lot of media, you might remember, did talk about this, but they talked about the infodemic, that the World Health Organization was targeting fake news, depending on which media you're reading. The left was more like they're fighting fake news, and Facebook and Twitter are on board to help fight this information pandemic. The headlines continued for a bit and they died out. A lot of the right-wing media were more like, they're engaging in targeted censorship. I would imagine a lot of people didn't read further into this document because it announced something even bigger, in my opinion, which was, folks, on that same page, still on the WHO website, it says this: the United Nations Foundation caught up with Tim Nguyen on the sidelines of the world's first, get this, the world's first infodemiology conference, which brought together world experts to discuss the developing science of managing infodemics. How do you manage an infodemic, an information pandemic? In other words, information pandemic is again, an overabundance of information, some of which they claim is false. And we've seen in the exchanges, the email exchanges that were made public of Dr. Anthony Fauci and others around him, that part of fighting the infodemic was to cover up, it seems, based on the conversations, to cover up legitimate investigations into their own unethical research with the Chinese Communist Party's Wuhan Institute of Virology and other virus labs. Part of the information pandemic was eliminating true information that went against their personal vested interests. But again, the narratives change, but let's go into this a bit more. Now, on this program they're discussing, this developing science of managing infodemics, it says Nguyen's team manages, and get this is the actual name for it, this team under the WHO, they manage the Information Network for Epidemics. That is the actual name of the program, one which has not been widely spread. This is the actual name of the program on the WHO website, the Information Network for Epidemics, based again on fighting the world's first infodemiology, information pandemic, which they say is leading the WHO work on managing infodemics. And that's an exact quote, which is leading WHO work on managing infodemics. So, folks, let's get this straight. The World Health Organization claimed there was an information pandemic. It then created a program called the Information Network for Infodemics, which it says is, quote, leading WHO work on managing infodemics. So the big question is, what kind of information are they monitoring? And if they monitor it, how do they deal with it, right? Remember, part of this was a huge program of partnerships they announced with just about every single social network, all the major ones at least, a lot of the major news outlets, a lot of the fact checkers, which notably Facebook just admitted during a trial, is in fact opinion. And also several organizations, NGOs, United Nations, and so on, buying into it. You have a concerted effort, again, of these different organizations, very much all politically aligned on a certain party line, that have decided that they have the right and the power granted to them through these, emergency powers to monitor information and deal with the information pandemic, the infodemic. And part of that, again, is an actual program they launched to do this. One which I should note is still very vague. We don't know, frankly, all the stuff they're getting into, but let me explain what we do know. Now, the page on this, the WHO page, it quotes this individual who's leading that program. This is Nguyen. And he says this, quote, Infodemic, this is an exact quote, infodemics have already happened in one way or another in past epidemics. But what's happening right now is something of a global scale, where people are connected through different means and share information more quickly. This has created a new situation where we are rethinking and reshaping our approach to managing infodemics in emergencies. How do you manage information, right, without censoring people, without deciding some information should be seen and some information should not be seen? I think this gives some additional context to what we're seeing on the social networks, what we're seeing with YouTube censorship, and we're seeing with other things like this. And the big question as well is, what else is this being used for? One, how widespread is it, which I'll get into. Two, and also, is it limited to just the pandemic, or does it include other things now that they've given themselves these powers? Stay informed and stay free.
Let us tell your story.
Facts always matter.
Hearing from everyone, from newsmakers to people just like you.
Deep dive interviews that challenge assumptions.
Bringing fast, compelling, first-hand news from China.